Hello, welcome to another video of Workers Hammer. I'm with Tom today. Hello, Tom.
Hi, all right.
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. And today we want to talk about your party, but specifically, this will be the first episode of a full-on series we want to do as regularly as possible about your party, obviously the new left party launched by Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, and we want to try to do regular intervention and commentary on whatever comes up here, right? We've just published a new issue of Workers Hammer. The link is in the description, and basically this issue lays out a bit our general view of that new party, that new left formation. What do we think about it? What are the problem it faced, and what's also a bit the problem with the debate right now on the left? So as a first episode, we sort of want to go through this, right? So, your party, what's your? Maybe you can lay out a little bit the context, the launch, the problem it's been facing already.
Mhm. Well, it's been a bit of a mess from the get-go, really, I think.
Yeah,
To put it mildly, I think, Corbyn was very reluctant to start a new party and kind of his hand was forced with Zara Sultana. And now we're in this position where the kind of differences between those two are coming out more. And
yeah. There's a lot of like factional, basically a faction fight between Corbyn on one side, Zara Sultana on the other. But nothing is clear, right? We don't know. There's no principal line or anything. Like,
there are little snags, little differences here and there, but for the most part, they are still Corbynites.
yeah,
There's been no break with that.
yeah. It seems there's been a lot of factional struggle about who controls the money, which organizational forms the party should take, with sort of political points that are tacked onto this,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't seem to be fundamentally about politics.
No, not at all. So I think it's kind of our job to try and break down like what do they kind of politically represent,
Yeah,
and kind of well, the other side of this is that of course this has finally gotten all of the socialists in one room together, so to speak, and they're all forced to deal with each other now. So the other thing is, like, if you're a socialist, how do you actually approach this party?
exactly. So that's the one thing it will do. It will force everybody to go into the room. However, this party, there was a lot of enthusiasm about the launch of this party, obviously. There's a huge vacuum on the left of the Starmer government right now. However, I think on the left, there's also a lot of naive enthusiasm about what this is going to be. And I think a underestimation or like misunderstanding of the problems it faces and how the next steps are a complete minefields really for this party. So there's the factional struggle we just talked about, but politically more broadly, what I notice a lot on the left, generally when we intervene, is often a not understanding or negating how much the left is discredited in the working class and how much of a gap there is between the left, the far left, and the workers in general.
Where shall we start? I mean, I think, if we go back to 2017, Corbyn has like real enthusiasm. When you hear the Corbyn chant, it's not like a bunch of leftists trying to revive something. It's like very real. There's like a lot of energy around it. And he also, has had that quite a large working class base still. And, in the 2000 election, as a lot of the left point out, Corbyn managed to win over 1 million UKIP voters, which isn't
In
insignificant.
2017, or
Yeah, because of course in that election, on the kind of red line of the day, which is Brexit, of course, he kind of stood firm and kind of said, well, we're gonna stick with this. We're not gonna
Mhm.
try and overturn Brexit. And then of course, just 2 years later, you have much of the working class going to either lending their vote to Johnson or voting for the Brexit party as it was then, because of course Corbyn betrayed that promise.
Campaign for a second referendum,
Yeah,
essentially, in
exactly. And that
2019.
election was essentially was the second referendum, you know?
Yeah,
It was, do you want Corbyn, who's pro EU, or do you want Johnson, who's against the
yeah,
EU?
get Brexit done. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's how a lot of the working class basically went to the right.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of where I think at least this is a really pivotal point. And then, of course, skip forward a few years, we go into 2022, 2023, and we have the strike wave.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, a real upsurge of the working class in this country for the first time since the 80s. And what did they get out of it? You
Mm.
know, like measly pay deals, if anything, nothing that kept up with inflation for the most part.
Yeah.
And, you know, they are worse off now
Yeah.
after the strike wave, after
Yeah.
all that courage.
You had really an opportunity to pull the plug really on the Tory government.
Yeah.
They were hanging on by a thread, essentially, completely discredited. And the trade union leaders really refused to mount a real confrontation with the government. And not only did they let that opportunity pass, but then used all their authority and money to campaign for Starmer, right? And
Yeah.
now we have a Starmer government, which was supported and is still supported by most trade union leaders, essentially, openly. And so you have this increasing gap. And I think that's going to be a recurring theme in our discussion today, because our front page and the main headline of our article is called "Your Party Ditch the Liberals, Win the Workers." And that's sort of that is a slogan which sort of summarize, I don't know, the core of our approach of what socialists should be doing in that party. And for us, it really responds to exactly that problem, to bridge this gap between the working class and the socialist movement, essentially. So why liberals? Ditch the liberals. Well, why are we singling out the liberals, or why is that a thing, really?
Well, I mean, okay, so I think if you look at Britain over the last sort of 30 odd years, right, since
Yeah,
Blair really, you've had you know, you've had governments, not just Blair but Cameron, um, who have these liberal ideals. So things like, you know, for equal pay for women, or
yeah,
you know, gay rights and so on, equal marriage, you know,
yeah,
those kinds of things. However, at the same time, in the sort of day to day, they continued Thatcher's, you know, deindustrialization,
yeah,
really grinding down workers, further privatizations of the NHS and so on. And so, you know, first of all, we have to understand, well, like what were many workers' takeaway from that was like, well, these liberals, you know, it kind of like uh how to put it, like
yeah. It's because for like you described, for the last years and decades, the ruling class has used liberal progressive ideas to really attack the working class. And what this has created is basically a backlash by the working class against these liberal politicians, but also liberal ideas, which is increasingly being used by the right wing. So if we look at today in Britain, the one political force which is really, really growing is Reform UK, Farage. And what they're exploiting is really this hatred of the working class against the liberal establishment, the city of London, the middle class, you know, respectable politicians, Blairites, all these people who have gutted Britain really for the last 30 years or so. And it's really being whipped up. It's making it easy to whip up reaction against immigrants, against gays, against trans, against all these oppressed groups, which the liberals supposedly claimed to defend while they were attacking the working class at the same time. So, and I think one of the main problem of the left in Britain is that it has merged completely or almost completely with the liberals. Most of the left today in Britain either defends openly just liberal ideas and values, or else really clings with the liberals in an alliance really with the liberals. And I think, to come back to Corbyn, that's really one of the central lessons of Corbyn, essentially, right?
yeah.
Over the Brexit period.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Brexit is really the most clear example of this. Like, of course, you have Corbyn's capitulation. But then you do, on the left, you have, groups like the Socialist Party, for example, who did take the right position to vote against the EU and did remain that opposition against the EU. However, in 2019, if a worker looks at the Socialist Party's press and it's got Corbyn all over it, which it did, of course, and the Socialist Party are telling you to vote for Corbyn, you just like
while he was standing for a second referendum.
Exactly. So even the likes of left groups that did have correct positions, they were still tied through Corbyn to the Liberals,
Yeah. And himself, Corbyn, he found himself in this position because he refused to break with the Blairites, right?
Yeah.
He really did all he can to maintain the unity of the Labour Party, which meant unity with those Blairites.
Yeah.
Obviously supporters of the AU, but, really those who have attacked the working class for the last, few decades. And so the reason why we say ditch the Liberals, it's really that liberalism has really poisoned the left in Britain and is really at the root as to why the working class is turning its back on the left, on the socialist movement, essentially. Another example, I mean, we don't have to get into this, but it's really over the issue of immigration, for example. Now, of course, as socialists, we opposed racism, we oppose anti-immigration bigotry, and it's important to be at the forefront of this battle. But the socialist movement has basically merged with, I think, a very liberal program and liberal view on immigration. Like just celebrating immigration as good and treating as racist anybody who has criticism or concern about the immigration system, essentially. Because it was part of Blair and the liberal establishment to bring a lot of immigrants into Britain for the last decades. It makes labor cheaper. It enables to grow the economy artificially while they're unable to actually create real growth. And the left on this question has really associated itself with essentially the status quo with this.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, and that, again, that's really what's fueling, one of the things that fuels the likes of Farage, because these slogans, refugees welcome here, or in places like Epping, when you see all these petty bourgeois Londoners chanting these streets are streets, it's like,
and they're just bussed from London and they've never been here before. That,
and as you rightly point out, immigration has been one of those areas where the Liberals use these kind of great ideals, but the actual purpose of it was really to further just drive down the working class in this country.
Exactly. And so it's 10,000 times easier for the right to just say, oh, immigration is the problem, and here's the entire establishment support immigration. The left is with them in these demos, so we're the ones standing up against the establishment. So basically our digital liberals is really the precondition for this party to really be able to compete with Nigel Farage. Because we're sort of painting this picture in general, but let's be real. The main challenge facing this party is that it has to really be able to beat Farage, undercut it. And I think for this, it has to win over workers, and particularly workers who are today looking to Farage, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we've sort of touched briefly as to how liberalism is really ingrained in the British left, how it has created this separation between the working class and the left, and how this is for us the main challenge, the main thing to solve, really. So right now, we mentioned there's a lot of clique fights. Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, they're not discussing this.
Of course not.
This isn't a fight about how best to win the working class. And also, I would add, in the left in general, if you look at socialist groups or different leftist publication, nobody really is discussing this key question, I think.
Oh, no.
This really big separation between the left and the working class and how to bridge it. All the debates that I've seen have been around organizational question, how to have a democratic party, like a party that functions according to democratic rules. Should we have one man, one vote? Should we have a federation? Should we have, some people propose sortition, whatever. There's all these, I don't know what's your take, but I find the debate over this new party quite poor and very low level. if you compare it to the huge problems the British left is facing.
I definitely agree. It's, you know, like, I think when I look at, like, go into some of these your party sort of unofficial
Yeah,
patch meetings or
we've
whatever,
been to a few. Yeah,
yeah, you get there in kind of like that they're usually led by a left group or some of these independent councillors or independent council groups or something like that.
yeah,
And I think the first thing that's very noticeable is these independent councillors who are really trying to stake their turf.
yeah.
And there's groups on the left trying to do that, but it's really I think the independent councillors that, for the most part, are kind of that layer who have the more sort of organizational weight
Yes,
to do that.
definitely. There's always a counselor at every single one of these meetings, and nothing against counselor per se, but for me, for the few I've been, they already represented to me a sort of reservoir of conservatism,
Mm.
of people who, because they have a bit of resources, a bit of contacts, and they're elected representatives, they sort of are already taking charge of a lot of these things. And politically, their politics, again, we're going to repeat, but often are very, very liberal on the question of Palestine, for example,
Yeah.
and anti-Zionism, on the question of an alliance with the Green Party, on the question of the EU, for example, or
Yeah.
NATO. All these key questions that are like going to be key in the next few years, they often, can talk a bit radical, but often fall into very liberal positions that are compatible, honestly, to a wing of the British ruling class. Anyway, that's been my experience so far when you talk to them, and I
Yeah.
think, and this is why I think it's important to realize this, because I think there is an illusion on the left as to when we had Corbyn 1.0, there was the Blairites, right?
Hmm.
It was very clear who was the enemy and who wanted, who was
Yeah.
against Corbyn. There was really two sides. Now in this party, I think there's a bit of an illusion that, well, they're no Blairites, right?
Yeah.
They're still in the Labour Party,
Yeah.
so we're good, right? And so,
I mean, that's one of the problems. Like, if you look at the previous Corbyn era, if your conclusion is Corbyn lost because the right wing defeated him, then
yeah,
if you see it that simply, then yeah, of course you're gonna look at this new thing and like, oh, this is great. There's no right wing, but the actual lesson to take away from Corbynism, kind of as we were pointing to just now, generally on liberalism, is what he was never willing to do was confront the ruling class in any way. So like Brexit, as we talked about, but also the question of anti-Semitism, where
yeah.
couldn't he really cowered away, couldn't defend any of his members who were being witch hunted.
But that's the thing. It's the failure to really confront and organize a fight against the liberal establishment. And if you think that this isn't going to be a problem in this new party, you're completely wrong. Because although there's no open Blairites, there are plenty of people already in this party who are there to advance their career, who are there to advance their prospect at re-election, who are there to sort of find a middle ground between leftist politics and British imperialist ruling class, right?
Yeah.
And who are going to try to find, this middle road in a certain sense. And it's going to be the same fundamental challenge posed. And I think what's harder is because the lines are murkier. And I think one of the few important tasks of socialists that we have to do, particularly at this early stage, is to make the lines as clear as possible,
Yeah.
right? Now, before getting into these lines and what question are important, our article makes an important point about bureaucraticism. A lot of people are worried because clique fights going on. It's been over a month that the announcement has been made. It seems there's zero progress made on this party, although there are, almost 1 million people who sign up, are very enthusiastic. Everybody knows that there's some big fight internally. I don't know, nothing is advancing and it seems paralyzed. A lot of people are very worried about having a party where everything's going to be secret, everything's going to be decided at the top, which is obviously a legitimate
Yeah,
worry. So
definitely. Yeah.
so what do we say about this, and what how do we explain this, or what's the source of this? Essentially, that's what I haven't seen on the left. Why is this so cliquey? and bureaucratic and secret.
Well, let's look at both fractions and start with Corbyn.
Yeah.
Corbyn's biggest strength is really walking outside of a room when an argument's going on. So he wants a federal structure.
Yeah.
And what that really allows is it lets the arguments to go on in the party, whilst he can kind of not take responsibility for any of them.
Yeah.
Step to the side.
And still be like the grand leader.
Yeah, he still has his career status.
Without taking much responsibility, because everybody does whatever they want on their turfs, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's as well where those councillors come in and
yes,
turfs, and why they quite often like this federal structure.
Yeah.
And then you have Zara Sultana, who has the one man, one vote side of the debate.
And she wants a more centralized party. I mean, again, it's not very clear, but it seems to be what she wants.
Yeah, I think that's right. But as well for her, this is kind of her way to try and climb to the top of being a leader.
It's to undercut these turfs thing, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Who tend to be more loyal to Corbyn and to really secure her place, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's also what's behind, where she made correct criticisms of Corbyn and his dealings with anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But really what that is to try and wedge her way to the top kind of thing.
Yeah. That's what's annoying, because she said a number of correcting, but it was very vague, very partial.
Yeah.
And knowing what factional struggle is going on behind, it seems that the primary motivation behind these attacks is mainly to try to sort of undercut Corbyn and the people around him as well.
Yeah.
So that she can get this position. And that's why I think she's for one man, one vote, because it would enable really to sort of drown these councillors or these various interests into like some people call it a Zoomocracy, like everybody on Zoom just voting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it does really drown out the central politics, when you've just got this Zoom meeting of however many people,
But so Tom, okay, federation or centralized party a la Zara Sultana, what's best? People are like losing sleep over this question, and there's articles.
Like you said, like it's a legitimate worry that people do have in this question. But to be honest, squabbling over what kind of democracy isn't actually going to solve this problem. We have to take a step back, look at the actual political lines, and approach it from that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you're actually going to undercut the sort of rotten layers of the party.
Because in the end, there are advantages to like one man, one vote. There are advantages to federation. There are disadvantages to both things. But the main problem is that right now, both these proposals are used to advance a particular faction without any sort of political difference.
Yeah.
And so both are bad. They don't advance necessarily the interests of the broader working class. They just advance the particular interests of that faction against that one with no real political distinction. Yeah. That's the problem. I think there's another element that people are legitimately worried about democracy, but I think an element that's lost often is that, of course, it's and like I'm thinking about that caucus. There's a caucus called the Democratic Socialists.
Oh yeah.
That was created by, I think, people around RS21, and they're for democracy in the party and democratic rules. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, we should fight for the best democratic rules for those who let the base and the most left-wing element express themselves, but you can't fight for democracy short of a program. And I think that's what lost to people, because where does bureaucraticism comes from? It's always the same thing, and whether it is in this party, in the Corbyn era, in the Soviet Union, it comes from the necessity for like a privileged layer to really contain and suppress revolutionary impulses of people. So that means that if you want to fight for democracy, you got to fight it also on a political basis and really show the what politics is behind. Like, I think the issue of Zionism is actually quite revealing on this. So Zara Sultana said, I'm an anti-Zionist, blah, 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 and criticized Corbyn for sort of capitulating under Labour over the anti-Semitism question. Of course, she's right to be an anti-Zionist. We are anti-Zionist too. And Corbyn, he doesn't want to say he's an anti-Zionist, right? There was videos of him saying, "Are you an anti-Zionist?" And he doesn't want to answer the question, and he's like, "Oh," he's sort of annoyed. And so the question here is quite simple. Zionism is sort of a red line for the British ruling class.
Very much, yeah.
If you want to come out against Zionists, you're really going against this ruling class. And you're also going against, laborites, soft, reformists, all this sort of crowd that's tied in many ways to the ruling class.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to alienate all these people. However, the base of the party, not the whole base, but a sizable portion, particularly after like 3 years of genocide, is anti-Zionist and want the party to be anti-Zionist. Yeah. So you're caught between what the base want, the aspiration of the base, which even though they're not revolutionary, they do go against the ruling class, and the sort of the requirement to be sort of accepted in the system. And I think that's why he doesn't want to come out openly. He's sort of stuck. And this is where bureaucratism comes from. You'll get a bureaucracy that's going to repress that impulse from the base in order to make a deal with the ruling class. So that's the thing about fighting against bureaucratism, fighting for bureaucracy, for democracy. You got to do it with a political program. And I think that's what's lacking often in the debates over democracy. It's always about which rules. Well, all sorts of rules can be democratic and anti-democratic depending on how are they being used and why.
Well, I mean, yes and no, because the thing is, sometimes left groups, they do also put forward a lot of nice demands.
Yeah.
And this comes to the other point, like if those demands don't actually like hit on those red lines, like if they don't act to expose the likes of Corbyn and the kind of mistakes that were previously made and led it to defeat, then it's just like they're just added to a nice long list, and it does nothing, particularly when we're talking about trying to win over those workers.
You're talking about like parties who arrive with like a 10, 20 points program.
Because, okay, so a lot of parties, it's true, they have lots of stuff about democracy, but they also have demands that the party should stand on. Or
like nationalization of the companies, or anti-racism, or
all that stuff. So whatever those demands are, and pretty much always supportable.
Yeah.
The problem is that without actually drawing a class line, then we're not actually solving the problem we have here.
Yeah.
Which is the working class going towards reform.
Yeah.
Rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also doesn't help to clarify the class line, like you said, in the party. I've seen like people from I think one of our comrades went to one of the meeting, and there was a debate between, I think, someone from the Socialist Party and someone from the Revolutionary Communist Party. And it was, one of them was for nationalizations of companies. Another one was for the expropriation of companies with or without compensation. I can't remember. And it's like, this is kind of a stupid debate. It doesn't help anyone understand what are the challenges facing this party, like Farage. And it doesn't also help to draw a line between, well, who here in this room really wants to fight against the ruling class, and who is trying to maneuver this party to find a deal with the ruling class. That's the task of socialists. It's not to bring useless debates about semantics in it. And that's something we're very much against, And so, yeah, anyway, that's sort of an example, I think, of all these, I don't know, it's not just about demands, it's about where are the lines in this party. Yeah.
Which, I mean, not probably now's not the time to go into this, but that also does raise a funny point, and this your party really does expose the lack of differences between all the left groups as well. How actually similar they are.
Yeah.
Imagine being in an actual room with workers and having this debate. Like,
it would be ridiculous. Yeah. But let's talk about some class lines and some lines, because we've, in this article, and we've had published a leaflet before, again, the links are in the description, we had proposed a number of demands on which we think socialists should get together, work together, and fight for in this new party, in order to make these lines between, who wants to really fight the ruling class and who's a liberal who's seeking accommodation with. And we had like 3 points. There's obviously more, but we can start with these 3. And the first one was NATO, right? Opposition to NATO, obviously. And I think that's a key point, because if you look at the Ukraine war, if you look at the United States really squeezing its allies like Britain, demanding more money to help shore up the U.S. empire, which is in decline, that's going to be paid by the working class in Britain, obviously. And there can be no talk really for a just Britain while it remains in NATO, in the US dominated military alliance. And so we think that's why we think this new party should absolutely oppose NATO and make that actually a central point, right? Sometimes, however, some people will say that, like, well, a lot of workers don't oppose NATO or support NATO, or they work in the arms industry. I don't know, what would you say about that?
Well, I mean, it's true. Like, no to NATO isn't necessarily a popular demand in the working class. I mean, there's definitely a lot of opposition to the Ukraine war in the working class, but generally, where kind of class consciousness is at right now, um, that kind of does kind of ignite some fears. Like, well, look how unstable the world is.
Yeah.
Are you just saying we're supposed to have no way of defending ourselves against
Russia or whatever. Yeah.
Russia? But let's look at the reality of NATO and what it does. It creates crises across the world. It's a military tool for the US that Britain and France and Germany all go along with. It and pick a country, whether you want to say Syria, Libya, Palestine,
Palestine,
Iraq,
yeah.
All these things are not in the interests of the working class.
Yeah.
Whether it's something that's quite easy to explain, of course, refugees. I mean,
yeah, all these wars supported, engineered by the U.S. and mobilizing NATO's have created a lot of this refugee crisis, right?
Yeah. So the point is that is NATO's purpose, right? And Britain certainly isn't under threat from any of these oppressed nations. But the problem is that to actually be against NATO in your party or on the left generally, you have to really go up against the liberals. And I mean, this might be a good place to kind of segue into the politics of the sort of kind of like the more green types, for example, who, they take Ukraine, and they basically equate what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in Palestine.
Yeah.
Right? When of course the problem here is that actually what you have is you have the Ukraine army who are fighting to be part of the EU and NATO.
Yeah.
And then of course Russia is also fighting to take control of Ukraine too.
Yeah.
But
we're not supporting Russia, but they are fighting to be in NATO, in the EU, and backed by the US. Yeah.
Which can't be supported in any way. But the liberals, they look at Ukraine and the sort of devastation from Russia, and that's the example, or one of the examples they use to defend the alliance with US imperialism.
I think Zach Polanski is a good example, because Zach Polanski, so the Green Party has become pro-NATO a few years ago, support to NATO. And now Zach Polanski wants to be a little more left. He's like, well, I'm critical of NATO. And basically his position is like, he doesn't like NATO under Trump, but he sort of supports it when it's not Trump. Well, and that's a way to sort of...
Well, I mean, I think concretely what Zach Polanski wants is, because, NATO's controlled by Trump, he basically wants a military wing of the EU. Yeah. But what he misses here is that the EU too is completely dictated to by the US imperialism.
Yeah.
So it's completely
and is an imperialist alliance itself.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
So the point being, I think it's like, to fight for this party to be against NATO, you're gonna have to fight against those liberals who, like Zach Polanski and others, who try to fudge it, try to say, oh yeah, we're against war, but we shouldn't go against NATO, because being against NATO is a red line for the British ruling class. The alliance with the US, Atlanticism, that's key actually for its survival. And any break with this would be absolutely catastrophic for them, right? And so I think this is why this is a concrete issue. Let's move to another issue. Is no to Zionism.
Hmm.
So we've already touched on it a little bit, but the question of Zionism was so massive during the Corbyn years, right?
Hmm.
The anti-Semitism, and given the current genocide, it's key that this new party be anti-Zionist, opposed to Zionism, obviously supports Palestine, etc. I think, however, the problem sometimes in the left in Britain is that a lot of people and a lot of working people, I feel, in Britain don't get what Palestine has to do with their life.
Hmm.
Like, I think it's common sometimes for people even interested in the new party that are like, well, why is everybody always talking about Palestine? We want to talk about local issue. And I think sometimes the Palestinian movement is a bit unaware of this or doesn't understand this problem,
Yeah.
actually. And that's going to be key for the new party, right?
Hmm. Well, it really stems it that problem in particular really stems from the kind of the actual tactics and program of the Palestinian movement, which is completely based on moralisms. It's like first, like the way that they try and motivate being for Palestine is that you know kids are dying, and I mean that's true, and that is horrific.
Yeah. Of
But like
course.
at the same time, in this country, workers are obviously not going through anything that horrific, but not going through an easy time themselves. So they look at that and say, "Yeah, but what's that got to
Yeah.
do with me still? Like, what?"
Can we talk about the problems here? Like, it's
Yeah,
horrible what's happening there, but like.
and the other side of that is also, even if you're a worker who really does care and those moralisms do hit you, like it's still like, but what do I do?
Mm.
you know
Yeah.
it's kind of, which kind of leads on to what actually is necessary and to actually fight for in this new party, is to actually convince workers why it's in their interests to be for Palestine, to defend the Palestinians and be for Palestinian liberation.
Mm-hmm. I
um
think it's very tied to NATO.
mhm,
Why does Britain support Israel, really, and sends arm to Israel and helps that genocide? It's really because they are towing the line for the United States, essentially.
mhm,
It comes down to this, and that the foreign policy of the British ruling class, it's to secure their interests abroad, and for that they need the US. So when the US throws a stick, they go running, right? That's basically what
mhm,
they're doing. So opposing Israel and opposing the genocide, together with opposing the U.S. imperialism as well as the British ruling class support to constantly to the U.S.,
mhm,
is key to fight for their own condition here, because all these wars, like we discussed under NATO, they've brought only disaster to the British
mhm.
working class.
Yeah.
Iraq, Afghanistan, all these various conflict. You mentioned the refugee crisis, but also like they've brought just misery. Veterans who have PTSD and are a massive drain on the productive resources of the country for what? Just to shore up the U.S. empire.
Mhm,
And I think that's the question of Zionism is key as well, because it's such a red line for the ruling class. And as we've seen in the Corbyn 1.0, it was such a massive issue. And again, I think opposing really Zionism is gonna piss off a lot of like liberals, carrierists, people who want an accommodation with the British ruling class. So it's key to push this issue. The third point we've put forward, and I've kept it last, or it's the Green Party.
mhm,
We are against an alliance with the Green Party. And now there's lots of pressure for that, particularly since Zach Bielenski has won the leadership of the Green Party. Um, why are we against an alliance? Why they're progressives? Zach Bielenski is a leftist. This party is left. Like, why can't they just merge? Like,
Well, okay. What actually is the Green Party? Maybe we can start there.
yeah,
Its social base is very obvious to anyone. I don't think anyone would dispute that it's, very middle class, sort of a mixture of kind of like some professional layers, some just hippy dippy,
yeah.
all these.
Brighton, London,
Yeah.
Bristol Central, like,
Yeah, yeah, as well as, of course, your more sort of like Tories on bicycles as well,
yeah,
and
that's true. That's
where
true.
so that's what they are. That's what they're a mix of. And what do they do? Well, one of the main things really is kind of uh, their way of dealing with the climate crisis. And of course, the climate crisis does have to be dealt with.
Yeah, yeah, of
It's
course.
real and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But their way is really to put the burden on the working class. So they can talk about building social houses and
Yeah.
all of this nice stuff. But at the end of the day, have a conversation about ULEZ with the Greens and they'll just defend it, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you actually go and talk to a worker about ULEZ, for the most part, they're going to hate it,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't directly affect them. It's because they know that that is a tax that it mostly only applies for them,
Yeah. So ULEZ is that thing in London, that tax you pay
Mm.
for like dirty cars in London.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember during the electoral campaign when we campaigned in Hayes and Arlington
Mhm.
for the Workers' Party, a lot of the conversation, a lot of people, I hate ULEZ, a lot of working
Well,
class people, because it's a blanket tax on them. Every day they go to London, they have to pay
yeah.
this.
I mean, that was the funny thing about that election campaign. Like, when you're sort of going around the more kind of working class estates in Hayes and Harlington, like the one thing you were guaranteed to agree with whoever opened the door on was opposition to ULEZ.
Yeah.
Like,
But it is like a tax, and I think you captured it quite well. Like the Green Party, their way, and again, that's a classic liberal thing, is
Mhm.
to make really tax working class
Yeah.
pay, and that's why I think a lot of working class people hate the Greens.
Mhm.
They don't like them. They see them as middle class people
Yeah.
who are better than everyone and tax workers to
Yeah.
solve the climate
But
crisis.
but as well, this is also during, of course, the Brexit era, if you would
Yeah, yeah,
call
yeah.
it that.
Oh yeah,
The Greens were one of many elements, like sections of the Tories and Labour and Liberal Democrats, who really just looked down on the
yeah,
working class. And when I was sort of like 17 and 18, like sort of saw the Greens like, okay, progressive, like maybe something nice. But then after the referendum, and it kept dragging on, and you see all these middle class snooty just snobs, just like
sort of hating on everybody who voted leave and
yeah,
thinking
I
they're
mean,
racist and
I
idiots.
was trying to find a nice name for them, and that was one of the things that was like, okay, well, I'm not attracted to any kind of right wing politics, but like I hate these people.
Yeah,
So
and the
it's like,
European Union,
so I
right?
had to find a socialist group that was at least against the EU. And
Yeah,
of
yeah,
course,
yeah. Well, so but now Zach Palensky is more to the left. But again, like I look at this guy and he was an hypnotist, or I don't know how you say it, whatever. And then he was a Lib Dem. Then he was really into the anti-Semitism campaign in the Labour
Yeah.
Party. Really went against Corbyn on this question.
Yeah, he said very clearly, as a Jewish person, he couldn't support Corbyn.
Yeah, and now I don't know what he did after in the interim, but now he's presents himself as this radical like leader at the head of this party, which I think is very absolutely middle class. Anyway, for all these reasons, I think it would be a mistake for this party to really seek an alliance with the Greens.
Yeah.
I've said in another podcast on Spark Talk that I think what would be useful would be to use the Green Party as a distinction. This new party should be the party for socialism and the working class. If you want to join the party for the middle class and liberals, join the Green.
Yeah.
And I that's how I would use this division and really make it clear. And I think merging it would make this all murky and also really solidify the dominance of liberalism in this new party.
And the other thing is about Zach Palensky is at this stage he really wants nothing to do with your party.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Like, as far as he's concerned, well, we've already, we being him, already has a left party, i.e. the Greens. So join us, we're the thing. And I think at least right now he would be quite happy if your party just kind of dissolved.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
because they will lose a lot if it's actually successful, right?
Yeah,
they're not dumb, Okay, yeah. So these are sort of the three things. There's many other questions, obviously, and our article addresses more than that. There's the question of immigration. There's the question of trans as well, which has been quite controversial recently with Hussein, I can't remember his first name.
Adnan.
Yeah, secretary of your party, making comments about uh, how he supported sort of trans exclusionary space for women. And so he posted that. There was a whole uproar, and rightfully, among trans people of like, what is that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is bigotry. Then a lot of Muslim people started to take his side, and a lot of more socially conservative people started to take his side. And then you have this whole mess about the woke left, more socially conservative Muslims fighting each other. And I think the if you look at Corbyn, Sultana, and the leading faction of the different faction leading this party, it seemed to me they have very little political insight as to how to deal with these deep polarizing question, how to reach the unity between like Muslims and trans people, how to forge this unity other than just with liberal platitudes about, oh yeah, class solidarity will unite us all. I think that's also a lot of in my opinion, is that a lot of the reason behind the whole factionalism and the weight is because they don't have like a political strategy to face these hugely charged and polarizing
Mm-hmm.
question, really. I'm not going to summarize. We have a whole section on the trans issue, and for us it's really, I think the way to approach this is that you sort of need to hit at both sides.
Yeah.
First of all, to be clear, the new party has to defend trans right. We are on the side of trans people. They are an oppressed group, and we must defend their rights. Essentially,
Mm-hmm.
that should be the starting point. However, and when it comes to Muslim people and more socially conservative people, they they have to understand we shouldn't expect necessarily that they agree with
Well,
gender transition necessarily, but
no, you can't expect like a very traditional sort of Muslim person
yeah,
to accept these certain things, like
yeah,
these certain ideals. But the point is, but what you can get conservative Muslims to do is fight alongside trans people if you actually show how that's in their interest to do so.
yeah,
How only through uniting together are they going to be able to win any of their the interests of their particular groups, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. And I think it's the point is you have to win them over, not to all the ideas or
Mm,
whatever, but to defend the right of trans people.
yeah.
And show, and an easy argument is that the same backlash whipped up against trans is also used against Muslim. The same laws passed against trans people are attacks similar to other attacks you see in other country against Muslim, like ban
Mhm.
on veils, for
Yeah, that's
example.
a good example.
That's a similar thing. So, however, on the other side, on the trans question, I think on the trans movement, sorry, what's important is to understand as well the state of the movement right now.
Mm,
There's a lot of people in Britain, a majority of people who don't agree with gender transition, who are maybe not hostile, but do not support the trans movement and its aims. And of course, we must combat this. We should not adapt. Absolutely not. However, that starting point must be quite important about how we approach this question. And again, I think it's really, if the trans movement focuses on building alliances with other oppressed groups
mhm,
over the rights, democratic rights of people,
mm,
rather than fighting for, well, what's really in people's head over all these questions,
yeah.
that's the way forward. And the root of trans oppression is like, it's really the monogamous family, and you can't like shame this institution which is like 1,000 year old or multiple thousand years old by just shaming them or saying everybody out, like that doesn't support, and having sort of this hysterical reaction. In a sense, you won't win over those people. And I think it's hugely important to have this debate, because I see calls a lot of people who want to expel anybody that questions trans out of the party. But I think that's going to be a problem.
Mhm.
Again, there's huge numbers of people in the working class and the Muslim community who have these views. Well, doesn't mean we have to accommodate, but we certainly need to make the argument, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And on this question specifically, like y- the real problem here, like is the lack of resources,
Yeah.
in how run down Britain is.
Mm-hmm.
And so to actually deal with this question, you have to fight for more,
Mm-hmm.
because there does, with those more conservative layers, you do have to have certain services that are going to, at least for now, be gender, continue to segregate
Yeah.
gender.
Yeah.
But to actually have that whilst it not kind of being against any of the interests of trans people, you have to have more services that can accommodate both trans and cis people.
Yeah. 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 I think what we're arguing, and it's a bit controversial, but it's to make certain accommodations
Hmm.
sometimes for socially conservative people. Now, of course, again, to be clear, your party should defend trans right, and we should condemn the remarks of Hussein, and we should fight for the inclusion, obviously, of trans women into women's space. They're
Yeah,
women,
of course.
period.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
However, you do have sometimes to make accommodation. And I think this question of resources, take, for example, women's shelter. I think that's the argument we
Yeah.
mentioned. It's like, we should fight so that there's more women's shelters. There's a lack of it. And for really socially conservative people, we could make an accommodation if they really don't want trans women in it. We could have certain shelters that,
Hmm.
respect that strict, segregation. That doesn't mean, giving up on trans right or the struggle for trans right,
No,
actually.
no.
And I don't know, it's these kind of accommodation you have to make in order to bring people to your side. And I think it's really by being able to hit on both sides of this bad polarization, those who maintain a, well, strict gender segregation, man, women, and at birth, and that's it, versus those who say, well, gender doesn't matter, whatever, and if you question this, you're a bigot. It's really hitting at these two poles that I think it's possible to build this unity between
Yeah.
trans people.
Well,
And
I mean, the polarization's so like hard. It's gonna actually take like material
yeah,
conditions
yeah.
to actually to
Hmm. Yeah.
to actually end that polarization.
Well, yeah, you need to change society to
Mhm.
advance trans liberation, but you can't do this like if you're isolated, right?
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
and then there's the really uh, question of immigration, which is so. I mean, I don't know if we have time to get into all the nitty gritty, but you need to. Again, you have a rise of anti-immigration sentiment, which is obviously used by the ruling class to divert anger, but the liberals on this question really are really fueling this right-wing backlash in
Mhm.
countless ways by just celebrating immigration and yelling racist at anyone who criticizes it, or by essentially defending, honestly, the status quo, these hotels, and the
Mhm.
current immigration system often. And that is really pushing workers away from the left and really giving the right a massive boost. Maybe we can do a separate video on this question.
Yeah,
I know it's such a
yeah.
huge question.
But
What are the how would you describe the tasks of those who are Marxist and
mhm.
communist? What should they How should they approach just generally this party? What's the task essentially? Because I think a lot of people sometimes struggle. I think people in the RCPU, other, like, this is going to be like a reformist party dominated not by revolutionary forces. We're not for that, but at the same time, it's sort of a good thing. So, how do you?
Well, you have to fight for your revolutionary politics then.
Yeah, that's sort of the short
I mean,
answer.
it sounds basic, but like that's the starting point. But to actually do that, you do have to create polarizations. You do have to draw lines
Yeah,
on these hard questions against people, against Corbyn, against Sarah Sultana.
yeah. For me, and how I describe it, it's two. It's sort of a dual task. If there's any Socialist Party members listening, the first is that you really need to get into this party. This party is an opportunity, like we said at the beginning. All socialist group are stuck in the same room, and we have
Yeah,
to deal with it. I think this is good.
yeah.
We're gonna have to hash it out. So, but what you do in it, and I think the first task is really to, draw these lines, clarify the polarization and the class divisions in it and interest, which by pushing these positions not about socialism in the future or these stupid debates about, nationalization, expropriation. No one cares about that, like, at the moment. That's not the stage we're in. But it's to really sort of make clear this class distinction and really fighting for a break with the liberals, with liberalism, which we've explained, throughout this video, is really the main cancer on the left. You sort of have to raise the men that are going to bring out this thing in the open so that we can fight it and really operate this distinction in it. And second, then it's really to win people in this party for revolutionary politics, which you mentioned, create really a revolutionary current in it. Now, some people I'm sure who listen will be, oh, you just want to wreck this party. You're against, you want a split, you want disunity. And we're against a bad split. And what's going on right now in this factional struggle between Corbyn and Zara Sultana is really a bad split. There's no political difference. We want the greatest unity, but our point is that if this party remains united with liberals, it's an obstacle to unite the working class, actually. That's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's either unity with the liberals or unity of the working class.
Yeah.
Like, there's no in between, that's
exactly.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Any other thing you want to add, or?
No.
No? We've covered, there's so much thing we could talk about. We'll try to do off a regular video, hopefully weekly, but we'll try to react also to what's happening in this party. Follow our social media, Twitter. Please go give us a follow, as well. Instagram, TikTok, all the infos are in the description, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel right now. So yeah.
Cheers.
And share the video. It really helps. Cheers. Bye.